BookTube, it's Missy, and today I am going to share with you guys some books. So a couple of videos ago, I kind of sneaky peeked to you guys that I was creating a new series, which I am, and this all started back in December, or at least the idea started back in December of 2019. I had a fellow subscriber ask me if I could recommend New Zealand authors to her since I was going to New Zealand to visit my sister over Christmas, and I thought, hey, that's a great idea. I really want to look that up, and so I looked up a whole bunch of horror and thriller New Zealand authors, and then when I was out with my sister, we did go to a few stores, but I couldn't find them. It was very strange going into their stores. They only had, well, my sister lives in Queenstown, but she, like, her house is in Jack's Point, which between Queenstown and Jack's Point, there isn't very many bookstores, and the ones that they did have open had closed. So there's just the one, I believe, and then like Kmart. And neither of them had any like solid New Zealand author, like, what am I trying to say? Like a shelf to dedicate to those authors, which I found very strange. They had a bunch of American authors, a bunch of British authors, and it was just all like popular books that everyone is reading, you know, from Amazon or what have you. And so they had like the top 100 that people would probably read, but this bookstore was so tiny. And then I also went to a couple of thrift stores, and they didn't have any of the authors that I had written down. And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's because my genre is not as wide read as, say, contemporary or historical fiction or what have you, sci-fi. So I came home empty-handed with the New Zealand authors, but that made me think in January how I really wanted to create this new series, which is going to be called Horror Around the World. Now, I started purchasing more Japanese horror books in like February and March because I wanted to create this series with Japanese horror first, as in like the translated edition videos. So that would be Japanese horror, Korean horror. Ew, there's a giant spider on my wall. Ugh, I hate spiders. Scandinavian horror. What else? Indonesian. There's a whole bunch of different categories that I had written down around January time when I came back from New Zealand that I wanted to explore, and then I would dive into more, you know, like South American horror, Mexican horror. We've read these kinds of things, you know, when you have readathons where they say pick a book that's not set in the country that you live in, or pick a book from a, you know, a nationality that is not yours. And that made me think about all of the books that I could be reading. And then we had, well, we're having the Black Lives Matter right now, and that made me think some more, because I don't actively purchase books of, you know, people of different cultures, races, ethnicity. That's all about the same thing. I mean, genders. Like, I don't actively go and seek out these authors and then buy the books because I read horror fiction. So if you write horror, I will read it. But then I was talking to my son about this like last week or the week before, and I was trying to give him like an analogy of why it's so important for us all, it doesn't matter what color we are, for us all to stand up for, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. Because, say for instance, you have 5 bullies, right? And they're picking on one person. It doesn't matter what the person is, but they're picking on the one person. And 5 against 1 is insane and not fair, and that's not a fair fight, and you probably lose. But say a bystander walks by and goes, hey, that's not right, and stands behind that one person, right? So now there's 2 against 5. And then another person goes, hey, what's going on? And then they stand, and then they stand, and then they stand. And now he's got a group of 20 against 5 bullies. Those 5 bullies are going to back down because now they're outnumbered. And it's important for us to be outnumbered. You know, we have to outnumber the bad guys. And so with that being said, I want to actively start, you know, picking out books, not of just black people, like black authors, but of all authors. Like, you know, without us picking out their books actively, then they're not going to be read because they're not on the popular list. You know what I mean? Or they're not on the best. They might be bestsellers, who knows? But they're not actively out there in the community, so people aren't going to see them. So the more BookTube raises an awareness to other authors that are out there, the more those authors will be read. I mean, this happened with women authors. We all started buying more women authors, and now there's lots and lots of women authors on our shelves. But we have to make a point to do that. And so I'm making a point to do that as well. Now, I have 4 books that I want to share with you guys today. One I've had on my shelves for like 5 years now, and I've been meaning to read it, but I've just never got around to it because I have so many books. But this is a horror haunted house book. But I'm gonna tell you the books, and then I'm going to talk about the author a little bit and give you more information on them. I figured it would be nice to share info about these authors. So the first one I'm going to talk about is The Good House. Now, I always had a hard time saying her name, and then I looked it up, and it's Tananarive Due. Now, she is a widely known author. Her and her husband, who is also an author, they have a series of workshops that you can attend that talk about different kinds of like black noir in cinematic worlds, you know, like in like the movie thing. I wrote this all down. Maybe I'll just read it so I don't stumble. Okay, so she teaches black horror at a university, UCLA, and she also teaches Afrofuturism, which is like black sci-fi, fantasy, and something else. I think it's more in here. Oh, speculative fiction. So she is the executive producer for the documentary Horror Noir, which is a history of black horror. She's been a leading voice in the black speculative fiction genre. And let me flip the page. Which you can look up the Horror Noir on YouTube. I'll leave the link down below. It's just a snippet. I wish I could watch these things, but they do cost money, and it's not just like $5. It's a hefty chunk, but I'll talk about that at the end. So she's been in that the voice of speculative fiction for over 20 years. She's won an American Book Award, the NAACP Image Award, a British Fantasy Award, and her late mother was also a civil rights activist. Her name was Patricia Stevens Due, and she co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. I want to go and buy that book. She's married to Stephen Barnes, who is also an author, and they have like I said, those two workshops. There's one that's 6 lectures that traces black horror from the birth of a nation to Get Out, which is a new release movie, I think. And that whole workshop series is called The Sunken Place. So this info tells you all about common themes and which tropes to avoid with black characters in horror. And then they also have another lecture workshop that has 10 lectures in it that introduces you to the world of the Afrofuturism, which is black science fiction, fantasy, and horror. From music of George Clinton and Janelle Monáe to films like Black Panther and Space Traders, along with literature of W.E.B. Du Bois and Octavia E. Butler. This talks about how black artists use Afrofuturism to reclaim the past, present, and future. So for those two separate lectures, the first one, The Sunken Place, is $98 if you wanted to purchase it, and then you can watch it online. And then the Afrofuturism is $297, and so there's no way I'm paying that price for those. It would be lovely to be able to get like a teacher discount so I can like watch it. I'm very interested, but I can't pay $300 for a lecture. We don't have the money for that. So but that would be really nice. So that is Ta Nana Riv Do. So her and her husband both write horror. She does have more than this. I've read a short story from Tananarive about a teacher who turns into an alligator, which I thought was very strange. This one, I have opened it up and I've read like the first chapter, I think, but I read it like 5 years ago, and then I put it back on my shelf because then I picked up something else for another readathon. But I'm really looking forward to this. Also, this just so happens to be a signed copy from 2003. I thought that was pretty awesome. I bought this from Book Off a really long time ago. Like I said, like 5 years ago. So I'm looking forward to that one. And then because Tananarive talks about Octavia Butler, I picked up one of her books, which is called The Fledgling, and this is a vampire story about a woman who, I think she was in her 50s, is what the synopsis says, and she wakes up in a child's body, and now she's a vampire, and she has to deal with the politics of what vampires do and what you can and cannot do and so forth. So for Octavia, she is called the Grand Dame of science fiction. What does it say here? Having been she was the first black woman to write sci-fi. She was born June 22nd, 1947, and during 1969 and 1970, she studied at the Screenwriters Guild Open Door Program and the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop. She first published a story called Crossover that came out in 1971, which is an anthology, which is called The Pattern Master, and her first book was published in 1976. Oh, I'm sorry, I have like a little arrow poking up. So her first published story was Crossover, but her first book, story and book are two different things, her first book was The Pattern Master, and that one came out in 1976. Kindred is one of her stories that she wrote, which is a time-traveling sci-fi about a woman named Dana who, while celebrating her 26th birthday in 1976, is transported to the antebellum Maryland. She saves a drowning white boy, and for her effort, she is then faced with a shotgun to her face. Right before she gets shot, she wakes up back in 1976. This book allowed her to support herself full-time as a writer. So I want to pick up that one next. Sounds interesting. That's called what was it? Kindred. And then she won the Hugo Award in 1984 and 1985. In 1984 through 1989, she won a Nubella Award, the Locus Award, and an award for Best Novelette from Science Fiction Chronicle. Her last award, Solstice Award for Sci-Fi and Fantasy Writers of America, was in 2012. So that's all about Octavia E. Butler. I got all this information from their actual websites. So if you type in octaviabutler.com com or whatever. So these are from their personal websites. There wasn't a lot just from their websites, and I could have delved in deeper to learn more about these women, but I didn't. I do have other things I have to do, but I wanted to give you a snippet of who these women are, or who these authors are, and a little bit about themselves. The next person on my list is Victor Lavelle. I think that's how you say his name. And this is the Ballad of Black Tom. This is a little bit shorter. This is kind of like a novella sized. He does have other ones that are more popular. Someone posted a book on him on Instagram the other day with a bull on the front, and that one sounds really interesting because that one is set in a mental hospital, but I was trying to pick a short one because I have other books that I'm supposed to be reading. I have to have a review posted this Saturday, and I haven't really started the book yet, and I feel bad because, a publishing house is expecting this review to be put up, and I've been so hot and lazy that I haven't been reading very much. So I wanted to pick a shorter one. Anyways, Victor Lavelle was born and raised in Queen, New York. He's won numerous awards such as the Shirley Jackson Award and the Bram Stoker Award for his story Changeling. Do I have anything else on him? His was even shorter. His was the shortest from his personal website. Okay, so I found this man through a Reddit. I typed in like black horror authors, and then he popped up. So I'm looking forward to reading him. There wasn't a lot of black horror authors, and what I'm hoping that happens through this new series is that we can come together and write more authors down below. These are just 4 that I found. There was more than this, but these are just the kinds that I'm interested in reading. There were a lot of popular black authors that write like paranormal romance kind of stories that I'm not interested in reading. I can't think of her name right now, but if I told you, you would know. So what I'll do is I'll set her book here, and you'll definitely know what I'm talking about, and you may or may not have known that she was a black author, but yeah, I'm not interested in these kinds of books, so I was trying to look for books that didn't have so much paranormal romance in it. And the last book that I want to share with you guys has been on my wish list for like 3 or 4 years now. I can't remember if it was Lala that first told me about this book, or if it was Mercy's musings. Oh my gosh, if I don't if I don't say the person's channel name constantly in my head, I will forget how to say it. Anywho, and that is White is for Witching. I did show you guys this book in my last video. I've been waiting for it to come from the book depository. It took a really long time. But this is this is from Helen Oyami. I should have looked this one up. Oyami. So again, this is some information about her. She considers what she writes jolly gruesomeness, which I find super adorable. I've been wanting to read her because her books are like dark fairy tales, and why wouldn't you want to read modern day Grimm fairy tales? If you don't know Brothers Grimm, their fairy tales are a lot different than Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. The Grimm fairy tales are very, very dark. There's a lot of blood. There's hardly ever a happy ending. And so Helen writes those kinds of stories. Her first story, she published it when she was 18 years old, which I think is amazing. Not only because, you know, she did it, but my son's trying to write one too. And so if he could publish his book by 18, that would be rad. But I love that she was able to publish it at 18 and be able to earn success that way, because even at 18, you know, some people may not be able to write at that age. So when you can write a fully developed a book that everybody enjoys, kudos. Kudos, because some people can never do that. So I was reading an article between, you know, the writer and Helen, and the interviewer asked her if she was a psychologist, what would she tell her patients? And she goes, I would say, yes, you're absolutely right. There are monsters under your bed, which I thought was super funny. She was born in Nigeria, but she grew up in Lewisham, South London. She took her favorite book when she was growing up and turned it into a fanfic. So her favorite book was Little Women. And she didn't like the fact that I haven't read Little Women in a long time, and I haven't seen the newest movie, but it's not Joe. Who is it? The two characters that were supposed to get together, but then they didn't, and then it ended up being the boy and then the youngest sister that got together instead. Well, that's what she wanted to change the ending, and so that's what she did when she was growing up. She would take her favorite stories and then she would rewrite the endings to suit her fantasy of what she wanted. So she was already writing fanfic, which I thought was pretty cool. She's been collecting teapots for a long time. She has 11, and every time she moves, she makes sure that these teapots are wrapped up tightly and they are traveled with her. She has won a 2010 Somerset Maugham Award for this book itself, White is for Witching. And in 2012, she won the Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Mr. Fox. Now, this one was the first one that I wanted to read by her, because this is about women that get stuck in a house, I think. And you know how I love haunted house books. I think that's what it is, but I don't want to read the back. I don't want to be spoiled. But I absolutely want to read all of her stuff, because, like I said, gruesome, dark fairy tales is my jam, and that's what I want to read. So, hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight into these authors, and hopefully you guys know more horror authors, horror Black authors. I know Black authors write a bunch of different genres, and I'm absolutely for reading all the books, but I love horror mostly, so I want to collect horror mostly. So if you have more Black authors that you know of that I haven't mentioned that write horror and not like paranormal romance about vampires falling in love with werewolves, I don't want to read that. I want to read like dark horror writers, okay? So let me know down below if you know any, and I will continue this series. After I finish these books, I will do a wrap-up, and then I will then go back to my Japanese horror writers. I've already read two out of the 4 that I was going to review previously when I started this back in January. So yeah, that is it. I hope this was a good video and you guys found it interesting, and hopefully it's not too late in the month to start some good books. I know it's June's almost over already. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you guys are having a good week, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks so much.